Welcome to Professor Wright. You have a voice. Let's find it. And welcome back to Professor Wright. I am the professor, D.A. Adams. Glad to have you back. In video number 5, we covered the beginnings of idea gathering, brainstorming, clustering, and free writing. In video number 6, in this one, we're going to discuss what are known as double entry notes, and we're going to get into quite a bit of detail on these. Well, let's imagine that we've been given an assignment in our composition class where we're to write a descriptive essay on our favorite hobby. Now, the first thing we want to do for double entry notes, after we've done our audience analysis, maybe we've done some brainstorming, now we're going to get into double entry notes. The first thing we want to do is draw a big T. Now, those of you who know that I'm from the state of Tennessee may think that I'm going to make some comment about the University of Tennessee at this point, but that's not true. The T actually stands for Tigers. Go Memphis. We can forget about that other school. In the left column, we're going to label it characteristics. And these are going to be the physical characteristics of whatever it is we're analyzing. For right now, we want to forget about the right column. Let's forget that that right column exists, and let's just focus exclusively on this left column. Because one of the big keys to doing good double entry notes is to completely fill out this left-hand column before we even consider what's going to go into the right column. So for right now, leave that left column blank and let's focus exclusively on coming up with the physical characteristics. Now for this video, we're going to do my favorite hobby, which happens to be working outdoors, doing yard work, doing landscaping, that kind of stuff. And that's my favorite hobby. It helps me relax. I enjoy it. So that's what we're going to cover as far as doing double entry notes on that for my paper that I'm going to put together for this composition class. When I start thinking about the physical characteristics of working outdoors, one of the first things that I think of is sunshine. If you're working outdoors, you are in the sun. There's just no two ways about it. The next thing that I think about as far as physical characteristics go kind of goes hand in hand with sunshine, but it's a little different. It's the weather, because while the sun does affect the weather can, it can be anything. And so when you're working outdoors, you're always a slave to the weather. You are always at the mercy of whatever the weather is doing. And that's an important physical characteristic to consider whenever you're talking about and trying to describe working outdoors. Another important physical characteristic is the physical exercise that you get. I mean, it's a good workout. And anybody who has done any kind of working outdoors, and anybody who's done it professionally especially, can attest, it can put you through your paces working outdoors. You work just about every muscle group, you get good cardio, you do a lot of anaerobic exercise. It's a pretty good workout. Another really important physical characteristic to consider are the tools that you use when you're working outdoors. And there's a bunch of them. We could make a whole list of nothing but the tools. For right now, we're just going to keep it simple and label it just tools. Now, for our purposes here, we could keep going. We could come up with a whole 3 or 4 screens worth of information here. But for our purposes here, our last point that we're going to come up with right now is the end product that you have once you've worked outdoors, once you've done some kind of landscaping or even just cut the grass. You have that end product that's in front of you. Like I said, we could come up with a bunch more, but let's just focus on these 5 for now for our purposes in putting this together. So we have sunshine, weather, exercise, tools, and the end product. Now we need to come up with a little more detail because we don't have anything yet, really. We just have a few general ideas. So in the right column, now above it, we're going to write the word judgments. And we're going to go through for each one of these, and we're going to write out what this particular entry makes us think or feel. Now here, we may end up with a lot of redundancy. We may say the same thing for every single point. But that's okay, because right now we're just gathering ideas. We're just getting some stuff down on paper so that we're not starting out with a blank sheet of paper. All right, so when we look at the sun and we think about what the sun makes us think or feel, for me, obviously, if you're out in the sun, you're either warm or you're hot. There's very little in between. Now, obviously, if you're in Arctic conditions and it's below freezing, you may not be hot. But the sun itself usually will warm your skin. And often when you're out in the sun, you're at the very least going to be warmed up by it if you're doing any kind of physical activity at all. Another thing that you think about as far as being in the sun is getting a good tan. There's not much better than soaking up the vitamin D and feeling good and having a nice bronzed look to your skin. But as you get a little bit older, you start to realize that all that tanning can lead to skin cancer. And so you start to think more about, well, I better start using some kind of sunscreen. I better get some SPF 40 and I better put it on because I don't want to end up having parts of my body cut off. But that happens as you get older. When you're younger, you don't really think about those things too much. Now, let's move on to weather. Really, when you think about it, weather runs in a dichotomy. It's either hot or it's cold, right? If you're working outdoors, there's really very rarely ever any in between. It's either hot or it's cold. And it's either clear or it's raining or snowing or worse, sleet, freezing rain, something. You very rarely do any work outdoors when the weather gets that extreme, but sometimes you do out of necessity. If, let's say, you live out in the country and a tree falls and it's covering your road and you've got to get somewhere in an emergency, you may have to get out and cut that tree out. So sometimes you do end up having to work outdoors in extreme weather. But it's either clear or it's raining when you're working outdoors. Now, as far as exercise goes, staying fit. Right? That's the first thing I think of when I think of the exercise of working outdoors, is keeping the body fit, keeping the body trim. Another important thing to getting good exercise is reducing stress levels. That's very important. Stress is one of the most harmful things for the body, and it causes all kinds of problems in all areas of your life. There's not much better than the good night's sleep that you get after doing a good hard day's labor outdoors, because you release a lot of that stress and your body is able to relax a lot more at the end of the night when you lay down and go to sleep. And so reducing stress is something that we definitely want to talk about as far as getting exercise from working outdoors. The next one, the tools that we have, or toys as I like to call them, because I'm a big kid, and honestly the fun of playing with the tools is a big part of the reason why I love working outdoors. You get to handle some pretty cool stuff: chainsaws, loppers, tractors, lawnmowers, all kinds of fun, cool gadgets that you get to play with when you're working outdoors, and you get to have a good time with them. And when I think about those, the first thing I think about, because of how my father raised me and just the people I've been around and the training that I've had in my life, first thing I think about is safety. Safety is the most important thing to consider when you're working with any kind of power tool, because it stops being fun if you lop off your arm. Another thing that I think about when I think about power tools is just the power in them. Because handling a chainsaw it's something else. If you've never done it, now get some training before you go grab one and start trying to cut down a tree. But handling a chainsaw, if you've never done it, it's a real rush, because there's a lot of power in your hands. And you can do a lot cutting down trees and cutting up different branches and downed limbs and whatnot. There's a lot of power there in your hands. And driving some kind of a tractor or driving a really powerful lawnmower, there's a lot of power there underneath you, and it's a good feeling to experience that. Another thing about tools is just the fact that they're fun. They're fun to work with. They're fun to play with. And so I would definitely, in my paper, I would want to emphasize the fun aspect of it. Because again, I'm describing my favorite hobby. One of the things that's important to me is how fun it is, and I would want to try to convey that to somebody else. Now, as far as the end product goes, well, first thing, the pride that comes from whatever it is you've just done. Even if it's just mowing the yard, when you get done and you look back and you see how good that yard looks, that's a sense of pride that you feel. And it's important, and that kind of thing gives you a good feeling about yourself. The other thing is that when you're doing any kind of yard work or any kind of work outdoors, it is true instant gratification, because as soon as you are done with whatever it was you were doing, you have the fruits of your labor. They're right there in front of you. You can see what you've done, and it's a good feeling to look and have something done instantly. Now, if I were doing this for a paper, I would sit back after I had my points, and obviously we could go into a lot more detail, but for time I want to try to keep it brief. I would look and I would say, well, if I were actually writing this in a paper, I'm going to combine these first two. I'm going to take sun and weather, and I'm going to mold them into one point, because they don't need to be two. And then I might look at it a little bit more and say, I talked about fun with the tools, but I really need to talk about it in other areas as well. Because, again, I'm describing my favorite hobby. I need to convey how much I enjoy it. I think that's something that needs to be in the paper itself. And so from there, now I've got a springboard. Now I've got some ideas that I can work with and start shaping into something else. So that brings us to the end of video number 6. Please join us in video number 7, where we're going to pick back up a little bit more on pre-writing. And then we'll move into video number 8, where we're going to start to get into organizing your thoughts in pre-writing. So please check in for those next 2 videos. And for now, I am D.A. Adams. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next time.